Here we go. Welcome today. How's our Tuesday? Okay. Okay. Well, my Tuesday started off, there was a coyote in our backyard. I was like, wow. I'm looking out the window, all of a sudden it hops up into the raised garden bed, and I'm like, what is it digging for? And then my wife had told me, remember when you were planting the garden and you came across a duck egg? It's very well possible that maybe the coyote had put it in there. Now it's coming back for it. It's like, dang, past possibility. Lucky we don't have a pet, so coyote's probably looking for a pet, maybe, to have as a morning snack. Who knows? All right, so there we go. All right, so today we are the rest of the week we're going to look at the downward cycle of the Cold War here, and you had done some Cold War crisis, so be sure that you get that in today. I will correct it, and so I'll update grades, as I'm correcting it, so you will know. So for tomorrow, you will know what it is as we are progressing the rest of this week. So last assessment, just to remind you, I'll open it up on Friday, so you want to take a look at that. And of course, have some integrity as you are doing it. It is a timed assessment, so 60 minutes. So when I say integrity, you focus on it yourself. Deadline for any missing work, of course, is Tuesday of next week. I got to keep reminding that because, I have a hold list that I need to submit actually tomorrow for those who might be struggling. So we got that piece there. If you have questions, make sure you let me know. All right. Any questions before we start today? Today, it's going to be a little bit more of me as I want to look at the second phase of the Cold War. And again, I always get a little nostalgic for the second phase of the Cold War in that this is when I'm a teenager during this time period, and then going off to college. Because one of, people always sometimes ask, Mr. Newcomb, did you really want to always be a teacher? I said, well, I had three options, or I had three things in my head. Once I decided I was going to be a history major, one of them was be a teacher. 2 was to be a lawyer, or 3, be someone working in the State Department. Because I thought it'd be kind of neat to cruise around and check all the different places and work for the United States government. Obviously, I picked teaching as my emphasis, but my history degree is actually in diplomatic history. So I was making sure I had all my bases covered just in case. So the Cold War is something that was very, very intriguing here. So I've got a few notes here that I want to talk a little bit about détente and the second Cold War period. Your crisis activities that you looked on help contribute to what we would become known as détente. Then I've got a little clip here on people's power, showcasing communism in crisis, because the 70s and the 80s, communism is in crisis. And then we have a little activity that focuses on that as well. All right, so I have a copy of these notes online, so if you want to follow along, you can, or just listen as we go through. Détente, that's just a nice fancy word for warming of relations. All right. And warming of relations between the United States and the Soviet Union. And if you had done Prague Spring or Czechoslovakia in 1968, that kind of marks the beginning of this warming of relations. And realistically, both the United States and the Soviet Union realized this has been a very dangerous time period, and that perhaps maybe we need to relax the Cold War rhetoric and try to find ways to cooperate. Well, from about 1968 to 1984, that will be the case. There'll be some events, though, that contribute to bringing on that second Cold War. All right. And so here, what we have is the Soviet-American rapprochement. All right, again, the creating friendship here. And boy, that photo, we have, who's that American president? Let's talk about that. Who could that American president be? The only one who is not elected to the presidency. No, it's not LBJ, because Lyndon Johnson did win his the presidency in 1964. But that was a good pick. That was a good pick. He was appointed vice president, and then will take over after the president resigns. And that is Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford. All he really wanted to do was be Speaker of the House. And the next thing you know, with events that happen in the Nixon administration, boom, he's VP, then President of the United States. And the guy he's standing next to is Leonid Brezhnev, the leader of the Soviet Union. There are going to be some reasons why for improving relationship. And so one obviously can be the idea of the nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis really highlighted how dangerous the situation is, and realistically how, by 1968, how both countries really are on the same footing with each other. When we look at the reasons for the Soviet Union and the reasons for the United States, in many ways, they are very similar. Both countries' economies starting to falter in the 1970s. Stagnation is what they sometimes will call that. So our standard of living is being hurt by high defense spending. We are spending lots of money, lots of money. But we're also trying to improve relations with China. Both the Soviet Union and the United States is trying to improve relations with China for really the same reasons, to kind of leverage that relationship against the other. And so for the Soviets and China, they want to have better relationship. They have been very hostile with each other. And for the United States, we want to have a better relationship with China as well, because of our war in Vietnam, but then also to isolate the Soviet Union, if possible. So we have some reasons to try to improve relations. Now, what's going to contribute to the success of this warming of relations between us and the Soviet Union and the communist bloc is, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, we do begin a series of arms agreements between both countries. And probably the biggest one that came out was known as SALT I, which limit ABMs and ICBMs, right? And a bunch of other outdated stuff as well. That was huge as well. The spirit of cooperation brought on more agreements and summits between the United States and the Soviet Union. So that's huge. Arms agreement, of course, people in the world are like, holy cow, thankfully, the two superpowers are finally sitting down and they're talking to each other about nuclear proliferation. You know, huge. Also, what's going to contribute to the détente success is we're once again back to Germany. East and West Germany start signing a series of agreements with each other. That's huge. That is going to help reduce tension in Europe. They both acknowledge each other's right to exist. That's huge. That is closest to a peace treaty. Closest. They also agree, West Germany also agrees, as well as East Germany agrees, that the borders that were established at the end of World War II exist. That's huge as well. So Poland can like, whoo, all right, we're good. And Berlin still maintains its special status. So this is huge. All right, but this is all coming out in 1970, so almost 3 decades after the war has gotten done. Still though, that's important. Plus, agreements between the United States and China. We finally recognize the People's Republic of China's right to exist. People in Taiwan are not happy, but we recognize China's right to exist. Plus, China gets the seat on the Security Council. Taiwan's off, China's on now. That's huge. And if we want to complain about trade agreements with China, it starts here. We began our trade, really fully trading with China at this time as well. I mean, all this is really occurring under Richard Nixon. You know, the guy with Watergate. If you take Watergate out of Richard Nixon's administration, Richard Nixon could go down as a very successful president. Not only is he doing stuff internationally, we have stuff happening here in the United States. He's also an environmentalist president too. So he's got a lot of positives, but he also has Watergate holding over him and his paranoia. And so some might say it kind of balances it out here. All right, huge. And then finally, the Helsinki Agreement. Anyone who is into human rights, all right, if you're big into human rights, Helsinki Agreement is something that you need to put on your docket to read. All right, it's a big, long agreement, but it has what we call three baskets to it. Basket number one is taking care of any holdovers from World War II. And that is, again, about borders. The Soviet Union really wanted the West to acknowledge the borders at the end of World War II, which then also legitimizes their influence in Eastern Europe. So that's basket number one. Basket number two is about cooperation, technology, and economic cooperation. And basket number three is the big one, which is human rights. We wanted to get the Soviet Union down on record that they recognized human rights. And so now that is going to become linchpins in diplomacy. That's going to be huge. All right, so these are factors that contribute to success here. The guy kneeling down, his name is Willy Brandt. He had been the Chancellor of West Germany. He is huge. He had been the mayor of West Berlin during the Berlin crisis, when the wall goes up, all that stuff. And he is acknowledging Germany's role in what they did during the Second World War. So that's big. All right, so finally here, let's start moving here to the factors that contribute to the weakening of détente, which really is going to bring on the Second Cold War. Criticism of the arms agreement, even though this is huge and it looks like it was reduced tension, the critics are saying that it really was to the benefit of the Soviets because their economy was faltering under heavy defense spending. One thing the United States could do that the Soviets couldn't do, we could borrow. We could borrow money because our economy was a juggernaut, all right? And still is a juggernaut. It's the number one economy in the world. And so critics would say by having these agreements, it's better for the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was still continuing to do its activities, as we can see in the crisis of the Middle East and Africa. Back to the arms agreement, though. The agreements only dealt with old technology, did not talk about new technology. So both sides are still engaging in new technology. Crisis in the Middle East and in Africa. Israel with and Egypt with the Yom Kippur War created some problems, as well as what was happening in Angola and Ethiopia. It just showed that the Soviets are still engaging in proxy wars. Not to say the United States wasn't, because we still were as well. And disillusionment with the human rights basket of the Helsinki Agreement. Even though we got the Soviet Union on record that they agree with it, that's all they did. They didn't fully intend to follow through on it. We can look at Soviet Jews and how they were being persecuted still in the Soviet Union as an example that they are not paying attention to the Helsinki agreements. All right. Of course, the Soviets can throw our civil rights record at us during this time as well. So what ultimately is going to bring it to an end, this warming of relations, is really what happens. So if you focused on the Afghanistan conflict, That is probably one of the main reasons for the collapse of the second, or of détente here, with the Soviet invasion of 1979 to help the communist government that is in Afghanistan. They engaged in what was known as the Brezhnev Doctrine. As a result of that, our president, Jimmy Carter, refuses to ratify and have the Senate ratify the SALT II treaty. We increase defense spending. We boycott the Olympics. We create what is known as the Carter Doctrine, which means that we will protect U.S. interests in the Middle East, or in the Persian Gulf area. So if we talk about like the importance of oil in our foreign policy, we can look at the Carter Doctrine as one of the key elements of it. When oil is disrupted in the Persian Gulf area, which is Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the United States is going to do whatever it needs to protect that. So we can look at Carter Doctrine as that, and then we look at the Persian Gulf War that happens in the 1990s as another reason for what we're doing. The emergence of Ronald Reagan. All right, we've heard a lot about him and the aura of Ronald Reagan in this past, I would say, 8-10 years. Ronald Reagan was a hardcore hardliner on Cold War. And the language that he used, I mean, he called the Soviet Union the evil empire. All right, so that brought us up to Star Wars. Plus, he initiated what is known as the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, which we called Star Wars for critics. But he really increased the defense spending that Carter had started. And the Reagan Doctrine was, you know, again, we're going to continue to assist anti-communist insurgents around the world and help support anti-communist governments, even though they might have brutal human rights records. They're not communists, though. All right, so that's something that we have to deal with, you know, our national consciousness, I suppose, with that. But then you have to take a look at the leadership issues in the Soviet Union. In a matter of 3-4 years, they'll go through 4 Soviet leaders. Brezhnev dies, then Andropov takes over, and he dies within 2 years. Chernenko takes over, he dies within a year, and then Gorbachev takes over in 1985. He takes over, and it is Mikhail Gorbachev who will preside over the collapse of the communist world, one would say. Not that he is responsible for it, but he had a role in the collapse of communism. It is hemorrhaging in the 1980s here. All right, so détente in the Cold War, it is coming to an end, and when he takes over in 1985, so between 1985 and 1992, so in 7 years, the communist world collapses. And we'll find out what really role did the United States have in that 7 years. Perhaps maybe it's not what we are doing, but what is happening within the Eastern Bloc and what is happening within the Soviet Union as well. All right. So that was a quick abridged version there. Oh, I do have a video clip here that I want us to look at here to kind of set the tone here for our homework assignment here called Communism in Crisis. This is going to be the early 70s here, and what is happening? Why are people in the communist bloc unhappy? All right, so let's take a look here at this video clip. All right, and also maybe you'll get some fashion tips.
Do was open the barrier and let the people go.
I was about that much over the white line, and suddenly it was...
After years of resign. Back Back in the 1970s, the Soviet system was at the height of its power. Each year on the anniversary of the October Revolution, they celebrated an idea still expected to transform the world. Soviet television interviewed Nina Motova as a hero of socialist labor.
Пленум ЦК КПСС и сессия Верховного Совета СССР наделила четкой программой работу. Ведь партия осуществляет руководящую роль.
Мы ходили первой колонной к мавзолею.
We marched closest to the mausoleum, so proud because our region and our factory were always considered the best. We paraded our ball bearings. The watch factory showed their new watches. Each factory displayed their achievements. We were so proud our country was so powerful. We felt like one beating heart.
The communist world stretched from the Pacific in the east to the heart of Europe. Poles, Czechs, Romanians, and East Germans were all seen as part of the same great family. In Berlin, Mike Fernl carried the banner for the district of Lichtenberg.
Everybody was marching in the same direction, towards the sun. If I was tired or depressed, those songs gave me a lift.
Für mich waren das diese Lieder. Ja, wie zum Beispiel Völker hört die Signale.
They gave me a real push.
Schub nach vorne.
The future lay onwards and upwards, powered by the brotherhood of socialism. A socialist Superman was creating a better world, all in the name of Lenin. The fabulous vision inspired new generations of schoolchildren.
We were everything. We had the best tractors, the best schools. Everything was the best here. We never had any doubts.
Мы пионеры, юные ленинцы. По-ленински жить и трудиться – наша большая мечта. Ребята, гордимся нашим солнечным краем. Городами, полями разбиты, и при слове отчизну мы всегда...
For Dasha Khubova, the Russian fairy tale about an all-knowing king who could see into every home was very real.
I believe Brezhnev also sent his head around the city. I could see his head there instead of the king's. Of course I loved him. I couldn't help loving him. He was our king. Every night I sat up in my bed half asleep with my curtains open and I saluted Brezhnev. I imagined his head was somewhere near looking at me. And I saluted so he'd know good people lived here.
The state planned for everything. People's lives were mapped out for them in a system that claimed to provide the care and stability that capitalism never could.
Our state was an example for the whole world. No unemployment, free healthcare and free schooling. Everything was organized, for everyone down to the youngest child. It was all planned in advance, even how many bearings would be sent to which factory.
And by the 1970s, the central planners were attempting to produce everything a modern consumer might demand.
Jako Alenka v říši divů se budete cítit v obchodních domech Prior. Z nepřeberné nabídky zboží našeho trhu se vám zatočí hlava.
Wendig. Schnell. Ausdauernd und robust. Ihr zuverlässiger Begleiter, der neue Trabant 601.
As a skilled worker in one of Czechoslovakia's biggest factories, Petr Miller's standard of living was rising.
I had a car, I owned a cottage. I knew that they had Mercedes in the West. Yes, it's a great car, but they're both cars, and they both get you from A to B.
Party control of all newspapers and television meant people heard only the good news, the propaganda of success.
Za 25 let socialistického zemědělství se zvýšila výroba obilí o 70%.
Decisions were made for you somewhere else. The party newspaper told you what to think. All we could do was chat over a beer, and we were far more interested in sport.
It was a world of mass illusion, in which the individual was part of the whole, and the whole part of the individual.
There I am, below the letter E. I remember how terrified we were to get it right, not to put up the wrong card, because Ceausescu was there in front of us. And for him, everything had to be perfect.
When Romania's President Ceausescu was shown visiting markets, Mihai Radu knew the displays of food had little to do with real life.
The truth is that the shops didn't even have 1/100th of what we used to see on TV. There was little food. No meat, butter, milk, no cheese.
Across the Soviet bloc, communist economic planning wasn't delivering. Queuing became a way of life.
Nie narzekam, teraz nie narzekam, nie gumburonie, nie narzekam. Ale powinno być trochę lepiej. Bo wie pan, żona idzie w kolejkę, stoi, cholera nie ma, ty kupisz te parę deko wędliny, nie ma. Tyle u nas w Polsce świnie hodują, u nas nie można kupić.
My good fortune was that my grandparents were still alive. I remember my grandfather would take a little stool down to the shop, where he would sit all night until the shop opened the next morning. That was when the Romanian proverb was coined. If you don't have a granny, you better buy one.
People spent up to 5 hours a day in line. The wait for a flat was 15 years. But the parties still tried to persuade them that life was far worse in the capitalist West.
Basically, when you look at that clip, I guess the big takeaway with that particular clip was, in the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union are spending billions of dollars on the latest defense technology, but what we were starting to see by the 1970s, really being spotlighted in the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, is the impact it had on one's standard of living, the domestic sphere. The planning was not providing, one could say, with the basic necessities. When you have to stand 2 hours in line for toilet paper, all right, we may have had to experience that at the beginning of the pandemic, but when that becomes the norm, when you're standing 2 hours for toilet paper, you're standing forever for canned foods and meats and all that stuff. And again, this is not necessarily the party stores. In many of these countries, you have stores that are for card-carrying members of the Communist Party and then for everyone else. So what we're seeing is for one would say, for everyone else, that becomes problematic. And people want choice, and people want to have a better standard of living. That is going to put a lot of pressure on these communist countries. And ultimately, again, like I said, it will come to a crisis mode. And by the 1980s, the mid to late 80s, it will help contribute to the collapse. So there are a number of moving parts here, and the economy is one of them. Okay. So with that, do you have any thoughts or questions about what you saw? All right, so your assignment here, Communism in Crisis. This is what we'll be working on between now and Friday. This is going to help us highlight the end of the Cold War. All right, so it's not going to be some flashy war that's going to bring it to an end, but it's more of what is happening inside these countries. All right, so if you open it up, there's a lot of handouts, but we're looking for this Communism in Crisis. And it looks something like this. And so those handouts are going to be important. Chapter 15 in any of those handouts should be your big points here. You shouldn't GTS. And yeah, you can work with a historical buddy on this as well, even though it says solo. You know, you can work with historical buddies on it. And so there are two parts to it. The first part is dealing with what's happening with the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev takes over, and he is presiding over an aged, dying Soviet Union. And he brings in a couple new policies, Glasnost and Perestroika, to help restructure the Soviet. Someone at the door? This is going to help, you know, these two policies in some way are going to help restructure the Soviet Union politically and economically. And, you know, China is going to go through something kind of similar to this with their 4 modernizations. They just don't have a Glasnost element to it. And then the Gorbachev Doctrine, which really applies to the Eastern Bloc in any communist country. It's more of pulling back Soviet commitment to some of these countries, and then see how this plays out into a number of countries like Poland, Hungary, East Germany, and Czechoslovakia. These are the early ones that will break away from the communist sphere. And so what happens within their countries is a good case study for what ultimately is going on that's going to eventually spread to other places. So what we want to see here when we look at the second part is what were the contributing factors to challenge communist authorities? You know, so what are they desiring? Do they all want McDonald's? Who knows? Policies, treatments, whatever it might be. How did the Soviets respond to the crisis? So it could be heavy-handed at first, or maybe not. And how did the communist leaders of that country respond to the crisis? Because usually if there was a problem in Poland or East Germany, if it was in East Germany, Erich Honecker would pick up the phone and just ask the Soviet leader, what should I do? All right, so what are they doing here? And the outcome of the crisis, changes that occurred. In all these cases, these communist countries are going to go bye-bye. All right, but what's it look like? And then, of course, we got our summary questions. In what ways did Gorbachev policies contribute to the collapse? And explain the role of nationalism and people power here. Nationalism and people power in ending communist control in Eastern Europe. So again, it may not necessarily be what Uncle Sam is doing, but it could be what is happening internally. All right? So we have that. So this is what is going to guide us now for the next few days. Each day, you know, I'll probably take a little bit, focus on what's happening with the Soviets and the Eastern Bloc countries. All right, but this should give us a good sense of how this Cold War is coming to an end. All right. So with that, we have probably about 35 minutes here. I'll cut you loose so you can get a good head start on this. All right, those at home, let's stay on and